Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pulp Crazy. I'm your host, Jason Aiken. In this week's episode, I'll be discussing Swords in the Mist by Fritz Leiber. It's the third chronological collection of his Fafhrd and Gray Mouser stories. And I'd like to dedicate this week's episode to Leiber's son, Justin Leiber, who passed away on March 22nd, 2016, at the age of 77. Like his father, Justin was a writer, and he was also a philosopher and a professor. I've ordered 2 fantasy books that Justin Leiber wrote, titled The Sword in the Eye and The Sword and the Tower. And I look forward to checking those 2 out. Swords in the Mist by Fritz Leiber is a collection of short stories, 2 of which serve as transitional aids. And there's a novella in here as well. The first story in the collection is The Cloud of Hate. It first appeared in the May 1963 issue of Fantastic Stories of Imagination. This was a digest magazine. This short story has Fafhrd and Gray Mouser going up against a mysterious fog in the city of Lankhmar. From what I could gather, the fog was summoned by a group of people known as the Hates. This congregation of 5,000 people, garbed in black togas, led by their archpriest, conjure the mysterious fog, which is the manifestation of Lankhmar's hate. This is all going on the same night as a great feast, celebrating the betrothal of the overlord of Lankhmar's daughter to the Prince of Ulthmar. Unluckily for them, but fortunate for everyone else, Fafhrd and Gray Mouser are, as per usual, out and about the town at night, and find themselves dealing with the Cloud of Hate and its thralls. I thought this was a pretty decent story. It didn't blow me away like some of the previous Fafhrd and Gray Mouser stories I've read, though. Still, it has an interesting concept at its core. I'm curious to see if Leiber has more stories revolving around the Temple of Hate and the black-togaed worshippers in future volumes. The teaser scenes featuring them had my interest more than the story itself. The next short story in the collection is Lean Times in Lankhmar. It first appeared in the November 1959 issue of Fantastic Science Fiction Stories. This was also a digest magazine. Lean Times in Lankhmar is my favorite story in the entire Swords in the Mist collection, and quite possibly my favorite Fafhrd and Gray Mouser story so far. It's that good. Fafhrd and Gray Mouser's partnership is broken up. No reason is ever given, but the 2 remain in Lankhmar and get involved in the religious scene. Lankhmar has 2 different sets of deities, the gods of Lankhmar and the gods in Lankhmar. The gods of Lankhmar are secretive and mysterious. I get the impression they are the native gods of the city. However, the gods in Lankhmar are transient, with outside priests bringing them into the city through the marsh gate. The gods in Lankhmar were once mortal men and women whose priests hoped to elevate them to godhood. To me, they seem more like saints than gods. The farther a congregation makes its way up the Street of the Gods from Lankhmar's Marsh Gate, the higher recognition of their particular deity is obtained. After their breakup, the Gray Mouser begins working for Pulp, a man who extorts religious leaders along the Street of the Gods. The Gray Mouser becomes kind of soft and a bit out of shape while doing so. Fafhrd breaks his longsword across his knee and becomes the sole acolyte to Mistress, who is the sole priest of Isaac of the Jug. Due to Fafhrd's training as a skald in the Cold Waste, he starts to bring some northern influence into the religion, and it begins to take off. This causes problems for the Gray Mouser, as Mistress, the priest of Isaac, becomes a target for Pulp. Lean Times in Lankhmar truly has one of the most well thought out and entertaining climaxes that I've ever read, and the story was just a ton of fun overall. If you love Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser, I guarantee you will be cracking up during this tale. The next story in this collection is Their Mistress, the Sea. It first appeared in Swords in the Mist back in 1968. This is a transitional tale that links Lean Times in Lankhmar to When the Sea King's Away. We basically follow Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser as they head out to sea and away from the city of Lankhmar. This is followed by When the Sea King's Away. It first appeared in the May 1960 issue of Fantastic Science Fiction Stories, which was a digest magazine. When the Sea King's Away had an interesting premise and setting, with Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser at sea traveling down a tube to a land that's basically an air tent below the actual sea water. Here they encounter the women of the Sea King, but things don't go too well for them. Fafhrd fights a sword-wielding octopus, and the Gray Mouser takes on 3 assailants at once. One of them is a scimitar-wielding dwarf. While I thought this was a decent tale, I also thought it was a better concept than an actual story. But like I said, I did enjoy it. I thought it was particularly clever how the ending changed the geography of Newan, which is the world where the Fafhrd and Gray Mouser stories take place in. The Wrong Branch is the next story in the collection. It first appeared in Swords in the Mist back in September 1968. It explains how Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser travel from Newan to Earth, circa roughly 232 BC, through Ningobble's caverns. And just a refresher, Ningobble is Fafhrd's patron warlock. Through Ningobble's caverns, one can access all of time and space if you know the right paths to take. The two end up in the Phoenician city-state of Tyre, where their backstories automatically get adjusted to fit into our world. For instance, rather than being from the Cold Waste, Fafhrd is from the lands around the Baltic Sea. The Gray Mouser also isn't from Tauvilius anymore. He's from Tyre. And the greatest city in the world isn't Lankhmar, it's Alexandria. I thought this was a cool mechanism that Leiber came up with to allow the next story in the collection, Adepts Gambit, to be a part of the canon, despite it taking place on Earth rather than Newan. I think this also adds some mystique to Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser too. The final story in Swords in the Mist is Adepts Gambit. It first appeared in the Fafhrd and Gray Mouser collection, Knight's Black Agents, published in 1947 by Arkham House. A few years back I read Leiber's original draft of Adepts Gambit, the one he sent to H.P. Lovecraft, and I did a Pulp Crazy episode on it. It's called Adepts Gambit, the original version. So, if you're on YouTube, you could probably search for that and it'll come right up if you're interested. The original version had references to Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, and there were a few other differences that are evident when reading this version that's included in Swords in the Mist. Even though direct Cthulhu mythos references have been removed, Leiber still uses the term elder gods at times. As I mentioned earlier, Adepts Gambit opens in Tyre, circa roughly 232 BC. This is Leiber writing historical-based sword and sorcery, and he throws in plenty of references to historical and cultural figures during the course of the story. The tone of this is also quite different from the rest of the Fafhrd and Gray Mouser stories that I've read so far. It's more of a Gothic-inspired tale. These differences are to be expected, I guess, as this was the first Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser story that Leiber wrote. And this is the only historical-based story of theirs that I've read, but it kind of leaves me wondering if there's more. Maybe Leiber wrote some more after this one, before he decided to focus on a fantasy world rather than history. So I'll be looking forward to future volumes to see if any of those turn up. One piece of business that I thought was interesting in Adepts Gambit was Leiber revealing that Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser were present during the Siege of Tyre by Alexander the Great, roughly 100 years before the events of this story. A stranger tells Fafhrd this, not knowing who the big man is, and Fafhrd isn't really sure how to respond to it. Evidently, Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser will have some time traveling to do in the future. And during the Siege of Tyre, it is said the two of them defended the city against Alexander's forces. Fafhrd threw heavy stone blocks down on Alexander's ships, and the Gray Mouser dove into the water to cut the chains, anchoring the ships in place. These were real tactics used by the defenders of Tyre, according to an online ancient history encyclopedia that I'll link to in the show notes. That was just a cool little thing that I came across. Just reading the text in Adepts Gambit and comparing it to the text in this encyclopedia, it's pretty eerie. Now, as for the actual story of Adepts Gambit, it deals with Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser going up against a powerful adept who has placed a humorous curse on them. But while the curse is humorous, the adept is deadly serious. Fafhrd and the Gray Mouser once again seek the aid of Ningobel of the Seven Eyes for advice on breaking the curse and defeating the adept. Ningobel sends them on a series of quests in preparation. The story takes them to two interesting locations, a lost city and a castle called Mist. For the last leg of their journey, to the lost city and to the castle called Mist, they are joined by a mysterious woman named Ahura. Adepts Gambit is a novella-length tale, so it's not as fast-paced as the short stories in this collection, but I still enjoyed listening to it. During the course of doing so, plot points from the original version came back to me. And you know what? I would recommend this for the sword fight between the Gray Mouser and the Adept alone. I really enjoyed that, as well as the scenes where Ahura told her story, kind of through flashbacks. I thought those were pretty interesting too, and they were more akin to a straight weird tale than a sword and sorcery story. Like with Swords and Deviltry, and Swords Against Death, I listened to Swords in the Mist via the Audible audiobook. I think the narrator does a great job, and Neil Gaiman's introductions are a welcome addition. And I highly recommend you give these a listen if you're interested in audiobooks and Sword and Sorcery. But if you're into ebooks, it's available along with the rest of the Fafhrd and Gray Mouser stories via Kindle too. I'm sure there's some good paperbacks out there too, but I haven't pinned down a good set yet. What I'm hoping to see is Centipede Press. I've seen that they've shown interest in putting out a Fafhrd and Gray Mouser series, and I'd really like to see them put out a definitive set someday, with all the different versions of the stories and bonus features. I think that would be pretty cool. One thing that I will point out in regards to the Audible audiobook is the danger of recording a series as you go, and not having the narrator read the whole series first. Which, I admit, isn't very practical, but it can lead to some errors. For instance, when Fafhrd begins the series in Book 1, Swords and Deviltry, he has a high voice when growing up in the Cold Waste. However, according to Lean Times in Lankhmar, in Book 3, Swords in the Mist, he began speaking with a deep voice once he started partnering with the Gray Mouser, and I assume when he first came to Lankhmar. The narrator of the Audible books kept him with his high voice throughout the first 2 books and this one. I thought that was kind of funny. Now I have to get it into my head that Fafhrd has a deep voice and not a high-pitched one. I'll put links to the Audible audiobook, Kindle edition, and other Fritz Leiber related links in the show notes. Pulp Crazy is located at pulpcrazy.com. I'm at Pulp Crazy on Twitter and facebook.com/pulpcrazy. I'm also now on Instagram at instagram.com/pulpcrazy or at pulpcrazy. My YouTube channel is located at youtube.com/pulpcrazy. And you can also email me at pulpcrazy@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.